Do you know how long 1,000 days is? Let me show you. Every dot here is a day where I use Anki, even when I had headaches, even on the weekends, and even when I had finals. Doing this activity for 20 to 60 minutes every day has taken a toll on me, and there's no doubt that I've taken weeks off my lifespan from staying up late to complete my cards. On top of the anxiety of losing my streak and keeping up a 495 card daily average, this program has been detrimental to my sanity. The main intention of using this program was and is to increase my vocabulary in the languages I'm learning, which are Spanish and Mandarin. So let's delve into how I learned languages assisted by Anki for over a quarter of a decade. I got a lot of things right, but first let's just talk about everything I did wrong. Year, 2020, incorrect usage. A big mistake I made for Mandarin in the first year of using Anki was not using example sentences for my cards. I would just find a new word and then slap it on the back and call it a day. Like, what was I thinking? You have to understand the word used in context in order to properly acquire it. And a good rule of thumb, I'd say, is if you don't know how to use the word in a sentence, then you don't know the word at all. Now, you can use the example sentences that they have in dictionaries sometimes, but I found that even better is just use the sentence in which you found the word. And I really found that these types of sentences help the recall a lot more than a pre-made sentence, for example. Building up my previous point, only use an example sentence if the word you're trying to learn is the only new word in that sentence. In Mandarin, when I eventually did start using example sentences, I was trying to shoot way above my level, and I would have like 4 or 5 new words in a single sentence. When it was time to review that card, I had no idea what it even meant. Because of that, I never ended up acquiring thousands of characters because I tried brute forcing them into my memory, instead of choosing the easier approach of choosing easier reading material, and just letting my brain fill in one blank instead of many. I used to be infamous for doing this in Spanish. There would be a new word with maybe 4 or 5 definitions, and I would put all of them on a single card. I felt like a superhero trying to recall all those different definitions at once, but in reality, I was just making things so much harder for myself because I kept filling the card over and over again because there is so much more information to get wrong. Do not put multiple definitions on a single card, please. It's too much mental strain and it'll just cause you to fill that card even more. So a good strategy is to only make one definition for a single card. And if there's multiple, then all you have to do is make a card for one definition, but then store the rest of the information not in Anki, but in your head. There's this concept called the minimum information principle, and all it means is that you should put one single piece of information on your card. Open-ended questions and ambiguity are not good. In accordance with this idea, you should also only be using the good and again buttons when reviewing. You either know it or you don't. The concept of not guessing multiple pieces of information on a single card leads in my Mandarin as well, where I tried guessing both the meaning and pronunciation of a character at one time. It lets me feeling more cards than usual, so a simple fix of this was just to make another card, but for pronunciation only. Cards should prompt for one piece of information, not many. One of my biggest regrets with my Spanish is not having used monolingual definitions earlier. Monolingual definitions are just definitions in the language itself, and they make it so much easier to recall that term. I really wish I had tried using this technique at 2.5 years in when I was ready, instead of at 4 years in. For both my languages of Spanish and Mandarin, I had to suspend all of my cards in the realm of thousands and start over from scratch to make only monolingual cards. For Mandarin, I experimented with having the monolingual and native language definitions on the same card because I just thought when I was ready to go monolingual, I would have that definition already there. Despite this, having 2 different definitions of different languages right next to each other is simply too distracting. The native language translation sort of contaminates the pure monolingual definition. It feels like having to learn a completely new word, so I highly recommend not to do this and not to mix and match definitions among different languages. For Spanish, eventually when I did go monolingual, even just glancing at the English in the word reference dictionary messed up my internal meaning of the word. I hated this problem so much that I created a Chrome extension specifically to hide native text in word reference. It's called monolingual word reference, and I would suggest it if you use this dictionary frequently. In terms of the monolingual transition, what I should have done is use English cards, which I had done for the beginning, but later when I was ready to go completely monolingual, I should not have been afraid to suspend or delete all of my current cards to start over from fresh with monolingual cards. The most egregious mistake I made for the first year that was inflating my reviews and messing up my intervals was pressing the wrong button when I wanted to fail a card. I talked about this a little bit in my video titled I used Anki wrong for a year. Whenever you fail a card, you should be pressing the again button and not the hard button. The reason why the hard button is so bad is because you will not be shown that card again for the review session of the day. The again button shows you that card repeatedly throughout the day until you pass it. The reason why I was so scared to press the again button was because by default, Anki resets whatever interval you have to 0 days, no matter what. Imagine having a card with a year-long interval, only to have it be set down to 0 days because you failed it once. Learning from this, my percentage factor for using the again button isn't set at 0 anymore, but instead it's set at 50%. So it's basically like using the hard button, but better. Year, 2021, too many cards. It is very difficult for me to tolerate ambiguity, and I have this intense compulsion to make an Anki card out of everything, even if it means ruining the immersion experience. The main problem was that I would make more new cards than I could review in a single day. And this was with 20 new words per day, mind you. This spiraled so out of control that at one point I had 3,300 new cards for Mandarin piled up. For the old Spanish dictionary I used to use, which was called Spanish Dict, I had 4,700 new cards in my bookmark section that I was slowly but surely importing into Anki. Ironically, I didn't even have any memory of the immersion content that those cards belonged to, and I felt very demotivated to make new cards. Also, I'm kind of a data hoarder, and I couldn't delete them because I would have felt like all that effort in making the new cards would have just been for a waste. Every day I thought, any new cards I make will just be another grain of sand in the mountain of new cards I already have, which I'll eventually get to, I hope. One day I got so fed up with this that I just decided to call it quits. And from that point on, I decided to never ever use a backlog for my vocabulary cards ever again. I'm glad I made that decision. The reason why I had a backlog in the first place is because I always wanted to be better than the day I was before, and always having new cards there, no matter what, guaranteed that. However, this also meant that I could do no immersion for the day, but still learn new words, so I guess it was a false sense of progression in that way. The way it is now, where I don't have a backlog, I feel so much more motivated to do cards because I feel like I have to go out there every single day to learn something new, or else that day might as well be wasted. On top of being a data hoarder, I am also a hardcore procrastinator. And let's be honest, you're probably procrastinating watching this video. The vast majority of the time, I would start doing my cards at 8, 9, or even 10 p.m., which meant that I would be tired for the next day. To combat this, I've tried numerous different ways to try to force myself to do cards earlier in the day. For example, in my to-do list app, I set multiple daily reminders to do my cards early in the day. That didn't work. In the Anki app, I made it send me a notification at noon to do my cards. That also didn't work. I've tried the Pomodoro method. You work for 25 minutes and then take a break for 5 minutes. You repeat that 3 or 4 times, and then you take a long break for 20 minutes. You keep doing that until you eventually finish your work. This has made me so much more productive in my schoolwork and my assignments, but not really with Anki though. What happened is that I would do my Pomodoro session at night when I'd already be completing my cards anyway. So why does nothing work? I even tried exercising on the stepper while I do my cards. In the morning, I would use the Anki app on my phone in order to do my reviews on the stepper. But the catch is, I could only get off once I completed all my vocabulary cards. I tried that for a week or two, and completing my cards early in the day always felt the best. But I barely even exercised in the first place, let alone exercise every day and in the morning, so I'm afraid that didn't work either. For the few days where I did get all my cards done early in the day, it felt like the boulder that was always looming over my head had just disappeared. I felt happier and less stressed. On top of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, I might be using this strategy in the future with a couple tweaks. One of the most powerful types of cards that I believe exists is the sentence audio card. There's a sentence with a word you're trying to learn, and audio of that sentence plays. I used to use the program called ShareX to record audio from a Mandarin video or a Bilibili video, and I would paste that directly into Anki. But just with typing out all of the characters and recording it, it was just too tedious, so I stopped doing it. However, I have started making this card for a specific podcast where I can easily copy and paste a sentence. I found that the recall on these types of cards is just astounding. If I ever come across a word that was in that sentence, I can play back the audio of that sentence in my head, and the meaning is crystal clear. The sentence is truly ingrained into your head, so I would highly recommend that you use these cards, or at least try them out. This is not sponsored, but a browser extension I really like for making sentence audio cards is Megaku. It lets me make sentence audio cards in Netflix with just 3 clicks. So again, this isn't sponsored, I just really like the extension. Year, 2022. New strategies unleashed. 2.5 years into my Spanish, which was about the start of 2020, I started reading my first novel, and I got about halfway through it before I realized that I had no idea what was even going on in the story. I wasn't focused on understanding or even enjoying the content I was consuming, but only on grinding out new cards. Unlike me, tolerate ambiguity, be sure to enjoy the story, and most importantly, focus on understanding the content, not on grinding out tons of new cards. In 2021, I had already vowed not to ever have a backlog for my vocabulary cards ever again because it demotivated me too much, and ironically enough, I didn't even remember the context that those words were taken from. So, I tried something that would still prevent me from having a backlog, but it would greatly increase the amount of learning I could do in a single day. I maxed out my daily new card limit. This meant that I could do 20 new cards a day or 120 new cards a day, and I can complete them all in the same day instead of spaced out over multiple days. This skyrocketed my learning, but it certainly didn't help reconcile my relationship with this program and feeling like I was being a slave to it every single day. A bit later, I discovered it. I finally found the strategy for completing Anki earlier in the day, and not just that, but also feeling happy and feeling like I wasn't a slave to this program. It wasn't reminders in my to-do list app, reminders in the Anki app, doing Anki on the stepper, or even the Pomodoro method. The secret is just to not make a card for every single new word I come across. Don't make 80 cards in a single day. For Mandarin is a maximum of 10 per day, and with Spanish is a maximum of 5 per day. Whenever I come across a word, I know I am very limited in the number of cards that I can make, so I ponder, is this word really important enough to turn into a card? Is it interesting enough? And the most surprising thing is that sometimes I remember words better when I don't use Anki. Anki is a sort of safety net to prevent me from forgetting a word, and because of that, I try less hard to remember the word in the first place. But when that safety net isn't there, I have to try so much harder and make an effort to remember it, which in turn just helps me remember it better. It's a real memory, not a fake digital one, and the fear of forgetting is what helps me to remember it even better. You can remember things without Anki. For the past 2 years, I've had these mood swings where I would actually enjoy doing 600 cards a day. Other times, I dreaded doing them throughout the entire day and would only start doing them an hour before I went to bed. Ever since I came up with this new strategy of only putting in a handful of hand-selected words every single day, while the vast majority I try to memorize on the spot, I've been so much happier, and I feel like my relationship with this program is finally restored. Anki is fun when I don't do a lot of reviews. Now, I only do 20 minutes of Anki a day, instead of my former 30 minutes to an hour. My New Year's resolution for 2020 was to use Anki every single day of that year. After that though, it's been the sunk cost fallacy keeping me going. If I've gotten this far, I can't just give up now. Leading up to 1,000 days, in the morning I would do like 1 or 2 cards immediately, so that theoretically if I got into a car crash or got into a coma or something like that, then at least my streak could be preserved for the next day. If I had a choice between delaying my graduation by 1 semester and losing my streak, I'm not even sure which one I would choose. The closest I've ever gotten to losing it is when I think one time I took a nap in the evening and then I woke up a couple minutes before midnight. Luckily though, I had done a couple cards earlier in the day, and even more lucky is that since the beginning of my Anki journey, I've always had it set up to where my new day starts at 4 a.m. instead of at midnight. So that gives me a little bit of extra time to complete my cards if I need to. Finally, upon hitting 1,000, I felt so much relief and happiness. This is what I imagine getting 100,000 miles in your car is like. If I lose it now, then at least this big of a milestone has still been reached. So what now? Language learning will always be a part of my life, and Anki is a fantastic supplement to language learning. So how much longer will my streak last for? For the next 1.5 years, I can say for sure, but I'm not really sure after that. Time will tell. Okay, so this video was focused entirely on language learning, but I do have to say that I have a couple smaller decks that are not focused on language learning. I have a small pre-made deck where I learn words in English. I don't read books in my free time in my native language, so I have to compensate for that. I have a large pre-made deck for learning geography, but I do prefer using geoguessr.com/Dotera because I just think it works better. I also have a programming deck where I make closed cards out of terms in my textbook. I'm really good at making cards for language learning, but not for anything else. Closed cards seem to work the best for words and paragraphs. Finally, my very newest addition is a chess deck where I have the names of some popular openings. I've known how to play my entire life, but I want to get a little bit more serious about the game. Thank you so much for watching. I can't believe you made it to the end. This is by far my longest scripted video, so I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button, subscribed, and also hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I upload. Take care, and see you in the next one. By default, resets any interval. Was that? What the? There's a bug in my room. It's fear.